We good? Can everybody hear me okay? Okay. Well, thanks to everybody for coming. We appreciate you sticking around with the schedule delay. Our talk is called Real World Intrusion Response Lessons from the Trenches. First, we want to give a little disclaimer. The opinions that we're going to express in our presentation are our own. We're speaking on behalf of ourselves, not on behalf of GE or anyone else. My name is Katherine Trame. I'm currently an analyst on the GE CERT Advanced Threats team. Prior to that, I was an intel analyst with the Hampton, Virginia Police Division for about 5 years. While I was there, I worked in tactical and operational intelligence and computer forensics.
Hello there, I'm David Sharpe. I started off in IT and systems programming about 19 years ago, and I've worked in a variety of roles ever since. I've spent the last 9 years focused more on IT security. For the past 3 years, I worked for GE CERT. We're both currently incident responders on GE CERT's Advanced Threats team, so we're responsible for finding and ejecting high-end intruders from GE's network. Specifically, we focus on stopping attempts to steal GE's intellectual property. Like many other companies, GE has to deal with actors like foreign military, foreign intelligence services, and others trying to take advantage of GE's research and innovations. And GE CERT and our colleagues across GE help protect against that. For those not familiar with GE CERT, just a little bit of background, we provide incident response services for over 300,000 employees and over 500,000 endpoints globally in 170 countries. The businesses that we protect operate across a broad array of industries from aviation, military, oil and gas, conventional and renewable energy, healthcare, transportation, and financial services. GE also invests over $10 billion a year in research and development. So we typically see a pretty broad range of targeted activity. Since the team was initially founded in 2007, its approach to incident response was based on the concept of defenses fail, so you want to get really, really good at detection and response. And the early GE CERT team did exactly that. Even with limited resources, early GE CERT built the original team and systems to be successful. And their approach and philosophy works very well and still serves us today. So the purpose of this talk is to share a series of lessons that we've learned from attacks that we've worked over the years. And we hope that you can take any useful ideas from this presentation back to your own organization. So the graphic on the screen roughly shows our process and is very much like what every CERT is doing in some form. We work in the response area, and we're directly affected in one way or another by everything that happens in this entire process. So this is a roadmap that we're going to use for our talk, stopping along the way to point out any items of interest. We know that not everyone here works in incident response, so we've selected items from every stage of this process so we can have something of value for everyone. So just a quick overview of the process. The step marked prepare represents our steady state, and this is where we operate normally, where we're documenting, training, and continuously improving our processes. Next, very quickly, harvested intelligence gets deployed as detection, and anything of concern arising from detection runs through our response processes. And learnings from response are then fed into prevention. And once the dust settles down from an incident, we cycle back to our steady state of readiness and preparation. And at the heart of it all is a group of really great people. So how are we doing all of this? Well, while it may be true that even the best defenses will sometimes fail, we're here today to tell you for certain that organizations that execute well in each area of this process fail less. In a sense, our goal in GE CERT should be essentially to put ourselves out of business. However, the reality is that we'll probably never get there fully. A significant portion of the economies of some countries depend on economic espionage or cybercrime. So there's no shortage of malicious activity out there right now to deal with, and that's where we come in. So we wanted to get started by sharing a few trends we've observed recently. First, how can you defend yourself properly if you don't know how intruders are normally getting in? You want to keep abreast of trends as part of your ongoing preparation. So as far as what is happening out there these days, on the screen we have a chart that shows approximately what we've seen since 2011. And we've seen 3 primary ways that we see hostile actions directed against us. The first one is penetration of some internet-facing asset, and since 2011, that's been the source of about 57% of our workload. Number 2 is watering hole attacks. Since 2011, that's been about 26% of our workload, and spear phishing has caused about 17% of the issues that we've worked.
For the 57% portion, we're talking about mostly straight hacking of internet-facing websites, things like PHP, Cold Fusion, SAP, vulnerabilities in custom applications, etc. Anything that's possibly remotely exploitable from over the internet if it's unpatched or unmitigated in some way. So what you typically see in this bucket of activity is the actor finds a writable hole in some application, uploads a web shell through that hole, and then uses the web shell to upload additional tools, dump system credentials, conduct further recon, and move laterally further inside your organization. The 26% portion is from watering hole attacks. And classically, from an APT perspective, watering holes, which are also called strategic web compromises, are typically where an actor would compromise a website where employees of intended victim organizations might go as part of their normal job duties, places like engineering websites or conference or other professional organization websites. And lastly, for the 17% portion, targeted spear phishing, we should mention that we saw a steep drop-off in early 2013 in the volume of APT spear phishing activity. And that lasted for several months, but has risen to closer to normal historic levels in 2014. Another trend that we see is attacks through trusted third parties. And by third party, we mean partner organizations and vendors that are somehow connected to our network. If you're running a well-defended network, we find that intruders start looking to your possibly less well-defended partners and vendors for possible ways in. And they might also look at your new company acquisitions. So maybe those organizations don't have the same money and people resources that you do. And if that's your reality, you need to learn how to manage those situations. Since 2011, roughly a quarter of our workload has involved third-party connections. So how are they initially getting in? In our experience, it's pretty much the same mix of techniques that we mentioned in the prior slide that we see used against us. So specifically, we might see a third-party website get compromised with lateral movement from that initial entry point in toward us. Or it could be a client machine within the third-party organization that was compromised via a phishing attack. Another trend that we're seeing, hostile Microsoft Office documents. In cases involving targeted spear phishing, malicious Office documents took the #1 spot for us back in 2012 and have held that position ever since. Adobe PDFs used to hold that #1 spot, but that's dropped off considerably for us in recent years. Specifically, it's one CVE in particular right now, CVE 2012-0158, that we've seen used against us and others repeatedly. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we talk about prevention. Java remains a problem for many organizations. And by Java, we mean primarily client-side Java runtimes on Windows machines, not so much server-side. Internet-wide in 2014, vendors were reporting Java being a component in malicious activity over 90% of the time. And we see a similarly lopsided proportion of attacks involving Java. And this trend started a few years ago, but got more progressively weighted toward Java around 2012 and has remained that way into 2014. And this is a true statement both in the APT area where we work as well as on the cybercrime and general malware sides of our organization. So on the screen, if you can actually read that, we have a list of 17 Java CVEs from the Contagio site that we commonly see used against us. And we've seen roughly 1/3 of these CVEs used on the APT side over the past couple of years. This chart is from Microsoft's most recent security intelligence report from May 2014, and it's based on exploit kit data from the Contagio malware site. And what this chart shows is a breakdown of exploit types grouped by technology from the years 2006 to 2013. So the lighter shade of blue at the bottom represents Java exploits, and you can clearly see a steep trend in favor of Java over the years. If you look at the 2013 data, which is the bar on the far right, you can see Adobe Reader, which is the orange in the chart, dropping off considerably. And Adobe Flash is still in there a little bit, which is the red box at the top. And Internet Explorer is still there, which is the green box in the middle. And from a targeted attack experience perspective, our experience is very much like this. And we also encounter many of the IE0 days in one form or another, along with a lot of Java exploitation attempts with some Adobe Flash mixed in here and there. And we'll talk a little bit more about Java later on. The final trend we wanted to touch on briefly is that we've seen an increase recently in the amount of malicious activity being directed at our people outside of work, mostly utilizing LinkedIn and Facebook.
And the ultimate purpose of this activity appears to be to connect with the intended target in order to directly social engineer information out of them. We see some cases where an actor might approach an engineer outside of those professions through social media in an attempt to befriend them as a technical peer, and then start asking them for sensitive documents about their work. We've also had people phished by ABT actors through these social media services in attempts to get malware installed on the victim's machine. So this is a tough one since it might be happening off of your network. So you need to think about what you want to do about this. A couple of ideas we had are, number one, maybe have a clearly defined way for your employees to raise any concerns they've encountered to your security staff. Number two, maybe make a mention of this trend through any security awareness training. And three, maybe start thinking about the health of your home employees' home machines. What we recommend is that if you receive or develop any intel about rogue LinkedIn or Facebook accounts being used to target your organization, you want to monitor your web proxy logs for any attempts to touch those accounts. So for LinkedIn, you can use the LinkedIn account number for the bad profile, which is in the URL, to find users accessing those accounts. And for Facebook, you can use the unique account name, which is also in the URL. Next in our process is intel. And actionable high-quality intelligence is very key to our success. So what do we mean by high-quality intel? This chart outlines how we see this topic right now. We've broken down different indicator types by how useful and reliable we feel they are at finding malicious activity based on our actual workload. And this model evolved from what has really worked for us in production environments over the years and shows what's working best for us currently. By indicators, basically we mean things you can look for on your networks that might help provide a sign that something malicious is going on. The best column at the far right shows the indicator types we found to be most effective. In this section we have tool internals, lateral movement techniques, more static elements from C2 like arguments in the URL, user agent string, and patterns in any data in the URL or data payload, IP addresses for recently active watering holes, and domain names for recently active watering holes. The other two columns on the chart contain indicator types that we consider of somewhat lesser value. So under the better column, we have AV street names, the quality of which is going to depend on your AV vendor, domain names for all cases except targeted watering holes, file SSD hashes, indicators related to DLL search order, and service and device driver names. Under limited, we have user agent strings from external recon attempts, IP addresses not related to watering holes, file MD5 hashes, and file names. So just to be clear, just because something appears lower on this list doesn't mean that it's worthless, especially if you see it alongside other indicators at its level or other levels. If you have the means, the resources, and the system capacity to alert on everything, that would be ideal and it's going to give you the best possible results. But if you can't cover everything, or you're just getting started in incident response, we suggest that you start from the best category and then work your way down, not from the lower up. The indicator types that are listed under best, to us, proved to be the most reliable and stand the test of time far better. And we actually have detection from built in 2009 and prior from that best category that still finds intrusions in 2014. On the other hand, IP addresses and domain names from a phish attempt that happened only once years ago and haven't been reused, you may not necessarily want to keep detection deployed for those. File names and file hashes can be trivially changed by attackers, so you may not want to focus your efforts on those either. However, things like how tools and malware operate usually require difficult and expensive recoding, so they're generally going to be more effective to detect on. Likewise, detection around hacker techniques and tactics stand the test of time far better, and for us proved to be good choices for detection as well. Finally, we'd like to make a very important point about this chart, which is this model changes over time. And it changes because we see attacks change over time. 5 years ago, this chart looked much different, and it might look completely different a year from now. We don't know in advance how intruders are going to change their tactics, so we have to adjust how we handle intelligence and array our detection and defenses accordingly. Next, we're going to talk about the topic of intelligence sharing between organizations.
We'll start by saying that a significant percentage of our workload has started with shared intel. And what we mean by that is that the thing that alerted us to something being wrong on our network wasn't always a piece of internally developed intelligence, but rather something was shared with us by an outside party. And that isn't always the case. We do have a huge repository of internal intel that works for us also. If you're just getting started out, we recommend you avail yourself of any ISACs, which are information sharing and analysis centers, or any similar organizations that are relevant to your industry. We find wide variations in the quality of intel that we get from all of our various sources, but with that said, we still mine all of them to be on the safe side. In our experience, information sharing services from industry groups are very effective. The U.S. Defense Industrial Base pretty much has this nailed with something called DSIE, the Defense Security Information Exchange. In our opinion, DSIE should be used as a model for other intelligence sharing resources. And what makes DSIE valuable is the people and its design, because its design promotes trust between the partners. While on the subject of shared intel, we want to recommend the creation of a DSIE equivalent for the U.S. energy sector. While absolutely everybody in this room can use better intel sharing in their respective industries, if we could ask for just one thing, we would ask for something as good as DSIE for the U.S. energy sector. So where do you keep or store all of your intel? We use something called CRITS, Collaborative Research into Threats. And CRITS is an information management tool from MITRE. It's what we use at GE for managing our body of collected intelligence. A shared repository like this is going to be better than private collections of intel that aren't shared, or private collections that leave when key personnel leave or change jobs. You want to have that intel centrally stored and managed. Also, CRITS recently went open source, so anybody can download it, and the link is on screen.
This brings us to detection. This is where we take actionable indicators from our intelligence collection processes and deploy them out into production to look for any signs of similar activity. What works better for detecting intrusions, network data, host data, or what? For us, it isn't just one thing, it is a mix. To be as successful as possible, we found that we cannot lean on just one type of detection alone. We have to cover all areas thoroughly. Our actual numbers, measured from 2011 forward, are 40% of our workload came from network-based detection. By that we mean we have a network sensor grid deployed globally, watching for signs of hostile activity around the clock with full PCAP. 36% has come from log analysis. The majority of these came mostly from hits in web proxy logs and antivirus logs, with hits from some other log types mixed in. Having all these logs flow into a central, reliable, and easily searchable repository helps. 19% came from one of our host-based detection systems. These were found by our automation that scans endpoints for signs of intrusion. Simply put, for us, the best intel makes for the best detection. So on screen we have the same chart Katherine showed you before, showing how we break down our indicators into groups, broken down according to what we feel the relative value is in finding real intrusions. Again, the most reliable indicators for detection purposes are the ones from the rightmost column, ones related to how tools work, movement of tools, and so forth. You can also see the special focus that we put on indicators related to watering hole attacks. We treat IP addresses and domain names from targeted watering hole attacks at a much higher priority than any other use of IPs or domains right now. Why is that? Because, if you recall from earlier in our presentation, 26% of our workload came from watering hole attacks, and IPs and domains work fairly well for finding those. So our data is telling us that it is productive to put more focus on those two specific indicator types. We also take advantage of other types of IPs and domain indicators, for example, those related to phishing, C2, scanning, but IPs and domains related to watering holes have proven to us that they should be treated with a higher overall priority right now. Our chart also shows that we recommend treating user agent strings differently based on their underlying type. User agent strings related to external scanning, for example, even if from a known APT actor, haven't proven to be as effective for us as user agent strings found in attacker tools beaconing out or across the network. Measuring from 2011 forward, when we found something internally, 100% of the time that came from an alert that fired based on intel either from the better or best column. Your experience may differ from ours. Know thy data. This might sound a little odd, but after a while you might find yourself with too much intel. too many indicators. You may come to this realization when the people processing alerts cannot keep up, or worse yet, you are missing actual intrusions or are responding too late. Or you might find out that when you start having system capacity problems in your detection systems. If this happens to you, consider using an indicator reputation scoring system. Use a reputation scoring scheme that allows indicators that have little to no chance of finding anything to age out over time. Such a scoring algorithm might include where indicators fall in our chart, indicator age, what intel source the indicator came from, and how prone to false positives the indicator is in production. If full reputation scoring is going to take some time or isn't feasible for you, please consider the simpler element of time. Use time to age out indicators that can be safely removed without lowering the overall quality of your detection coverage. The indicator types that we have marked in red on the chart are the ones that we find can be safely aged out over time based on our data set. Time. The concept of aging out certain indicators over time is a key component that we find missing from some of the existing intelligence handling models out there right now. A number of those models, like the Pyramid of Pain, are effective approaches, but we would like to suggest that you study your own data to confirm how well any particular model really works. Another issue that we observed in other models is a lack of published supporting data proving the model's completeness and true effectiveness. When we analyzed our own data, we found that we could be far more successful at detection and keeping our costs of operating down by aging out certain indicator types, basically the ones highlighted in red in the chart on screen. Now, let's walk through a detection idea that we think might work for all of you. A large percentage of intrusions involve the use of password dumping tools at some point. What we mean is that an intruder successfully phished you or maybe breached a website. To work their way further into your environment, they might dump the credentials of all logged-in users on the compromised machine, hoping to find an account with broader access. This is an attack pattern we have seen consistently over the years. So, if password dumping happens so often as part of intrusions, why not constantly watch for signs of those tools being present or being used? How do you do that? The 5 password dumping tools we most commonly see used in real attacks are WCE, pwdump, gsecdump, fgdump, and mimikatz, pretty much in that order. These are all tools that you can freely download for yourself. Does your IT staff or anyone regularly run any of these tools in production? In our experience, probably not, aside from the occasional IT administrator, IT auditor, or pen tester. So they make good choices for detecting intruder activity. Consider looking for these tools in at least 4 ways. 1, look for them moving over the network in clear text, for example, over SMB connections. 2, look for the console output from these tools moving over the wire in clear text. 3, look for signs one of the tools actually ran on a host machine. And 4, look for signs your antivirus detected and removed one of them. We have caught attacks these ways multiple times over the years. They work. To be clear, sometimes we see these tools as they were downloaded, and sometimes we see them slightly modified by the attacker. As long as you stay away from alerting on something easily changed like the file name or MD5 hashes, and focus on how the tools work or something that is very difficult or expensive for the attacker to change, you can more reliably use this technique for detection purposes. First, to look for these tools moving over the network in clear text, consider alerting on a unique string or byte sequence in the binary. Some people use embedded copyright strings, unique error message strings, or tool command line usage strings. That approach is fine, but something not easily editable usually works better. When we do see these tools altered by attackers, often they have blanked out the strings in them, so please keep that in mind when building your detection. Next, how can you go about looking for the console output from these tools moving over the wire in clear text? What's on screen is an example of what WCE output looks like, and this is a text pattern that you can look for with something like a snort rule. The console output of many credential dumping tools looks similar and makes for good detection. In practice, this general credential dump text pattern should almost never happen normally over the wire. At least look for this output pattern over SMB connections. Also consider HTTP connections. What about TCP port 1433, Microsoft SQL Server? Third, that one of the tools run. What is one way that you can look for execution attempts for each of these tools? Get a copy of all versions of all of these credential dumpers and run them. Does your AV vendor's HIPS solution log anything these tools do when successfully ran? What kind of things might you look for in the HIPS logs? Consider these examples for starters. 1. All recent WCE versions attempt to load a DLL into the LSASS process out of temp. If you see that happening, someone probably tried to run WCE on your network. 2. fgdump loads a copy of pwdump out of temp. If you see this, someone tried to run fgdump on your network. And 3. Look for unusual processes that open a process handle to the LSASS process. This technique is good for finding gsecdump and mimikatz. Both of these tools can dump and analyze LSASS's memory space directly. Thanks to Rob Fuller for this idea, by the way. So, try to cover these cases with a custom HIPS role for at least alerting, and preferably blocking and alerting. And lastly, find your antivirus street names for all versions of all of these tools. If an attack has progressed far enough along to where an intruder could attempt to dump credentials, don't you want to know about that even if AV ate the first attempt to run the tool? They are still inside of your network, right? So, see what your antivirus calls each on detection. If all else fails, upload them all to VirusTotal and see what your AV vendors report for each. Then consider setting up alerting for AV log hits for those unique street names. These 4 password dumping tool detection techniques should last you years, but you need to be aware when new versions of these tools come out or new password dumping tools get released. You will need to test those new versions and adjust your detection accordingly. Something else to keep in mind, for some types of detection, you cannot simply roll it out and never think about it again. We already talked about maintaining the detection for the password dumping tools. You might also have to periodically review existing deployed detection that is based on things like file format specifications and specifics of how application protocols work. Sometimes specifications and protocols change over time, and you need to maintain legacy detection that might rely on those specifications. We would like to share a couple examples to illustrate what we mean by this. First example, the RAR archive file format changed recently. We highlight RARs here because attackers have tended to prefer RARs over the years for data theft due to certain desirable recoverability features around multi-volume file sets. The RAR file header was, for a long time, from versions 1.5 through 4, 7 bytes long, and looks like what you see on screen in the top portion of the slide. But RAR headers changed recently, moving to 8 bytes with the version 5 specification. This change is a problem in 2 key ways. 1, if you only look for the RAR header magic bytes and don't account for the 8-byte version, and 2, if you process fields after those magic bytes in your detection. Why would you process fields after that header? If your intel tells you that intruders tend to configure their RAR files in a certain way, for example, they commonly encrypt them, then you must look past the RAR header to see if the right fields are set in the RAR file. More often than not, in real-world intrusions, RAR files containing exfil data are encrypted by the attacker. If you built your RAR-related data exfiltration detection years ago and don't periodically review it, you won't see that there is a version 5 of the RAR file specification, and your detection won't work properly as some intruders move to RAR version 5 over time, which has already started happening. Another example, Microsoft's SMB protocol. The SMB protocol has changed over the years. SMB v2 was released in 2006. SMB v3 was released with Windows 8 and Windows Server 2012. There is also an SMB version 2.1 that is the version introduced in Windows 7 and version 3.02 to consider. If, for example, you have detection for intruders that execute remote commands over the wire by first getting the remote time of the target system over SMB, then chasing that with a remote SMB @job request, you need to make sure that you cover all SMB versions and all combinations of SMB versions in your testing. What we have found is that some fields moved a little from one version of SMB to another, and that threw off some older but high-fidelity detection. The point is to make sure that your detection is still accurate as newer versions of important protocols get released. A few final thoughts on detection. First, if you deploy an application whitelisting solution on key systems like domain controllers, treasury systems, and so forth, can you detect on what application whitelisting blocks? For example, would you want to know if a psexec-like execution attempt happened on one of those lockdown systems? Second, can you mine your discovered software asset inventory data for known problem file names, service names, and device drivers? Likewise, can you mine the data discovered from your vulnerability scans for remnants of intrusions? For example, for any known bad service names and device driver names that may have been discovered. How about autoruns? Consider running sysinternal's autoruns across all of your Windows machines and centrally logging the results. You will catch a lot of general malware in this net. Some APT malware persists using the same autoruns locations as non-APT malware. Lastly, looking down the road a bit, we need a way to tell if the BIOSes and firmware on our endpoints have been compromised. MITRE's Copernicus project might be something to look at for detection. There are some vendors out there working on this problem as well. We need to solve the trusted computing-based problem. Next, we will discuss the response function, where we work. To help us all get oriented on the subject of response, we think it is helpful to always keep in mind what you're up against on the APT side. Roughly, at a very high level, some information that you have is deemed interesting by an outside party, typically an intelligence officer tasks an operator to collect this information. The operator attempts to breach the target, move laterally once inside, and lastly, collect the requested data. The operator can be one person, a team, or groups of specialized teams. The skill levels of operators vary widely, ranging from amazingly effective PhD level down to more junior skill levels. A couple things to keep in mind: not every APT operator is elite, and sometimes even elite operators don't always behave that way. Sometimes intruders don't want to appear high-end on your network. And lastly, high-value targets typically get the best teams assigned. To help us describe how we approach response, we would like to try a slightly different approach. That is by lining up a few attacker best practices for you and then showing how we think or react to each of those. First, the attacker. The initial breach always makes the most noise. Did someone hear me when I entered? If so, what are they doing about it? Don't make unnecessary noise or mistakes and possibly trigger incident response. Us, the responders. Any one alert might be our only shot at finding an intrusion. Process alerts quickly, respond quickly, contain affected systems quickly. More brains are better than one to determine what happened and to scope the intrusion. Keep in mind that you too might be being watched, and the attacker can, and often will, change tactics if they think they have been detected. A word of caution on our advice to contain quickly. Not all organizations agree with this. We move to contain quickly normally. It depends on your circumstances, so work at your organization's IR approach beforehand. Another point to keep in mind, sometimes if an intruder has been around a long time in your environment and they control several machines with multiple ways in and out of your environment, it might be necessary to coordinate kicking them out all at once, not one machine at a time. If the attacker just has a small foothold and you detect that early, that is what we are talking about here. Next, the attacker. Moving slowly gets you caught earlier and more often. You need a plan before the initial breach is attempted, and you need to manage your time on target effectively. Don't breach, then take a break. Don't breach and then continue tomorrow or your next workday. Progress the attack to the next stage immediately, complete the mission, and get out. Us, speed. Speed of response minimizes damage. Halt the intruder's progress as quickly as possible. If your adversary spanned the globe, you must be on watch 24 hours a day and must be in a position to respond effectively 24 hours a day. Make sure you quickly find all tools used to automate recon, lateral movement, etc. by the intruder. Get detection deployed out as soon as possible to fully sweep your environment. Repeat as new indicators are found. Next, the attacker. I might get caught, so I have to have a backup plan for both outside-in access and inside-out, if you're using separate paths in and out of your target. Us. I cannot assume that just the one machine I caught is the only one compromised in my environment. I need to check to see if this attacker owns any other machines like it anywhere else on my network. If it was the attacker's only foothold, did they fall back to attempting to re-enter after the initial containment? Check carefully for any lateral movement from all affected endpoints. Leave no stone unturned. Next, the attacker. Understand how our tactics and procedures appear on the wire and on host machines. Example, the way that we deploy 0 days in our custom tools may give us away. Track where each 0 day that we use gets deployed and where each custom tool gets used. Assume the target captures full PCAP and actively analyzes that. For example, when I do recon, does the target know it's me because I do recon the same way every time? Us, as the responder. Understand how intruder tools will look when ran from both a network and host perspective. This also helps with actor attribution. They assume that we have full network packet captures and analyze that traffic, but don't just look at IPv4. Consider IPv6 and tunneling. Some high-end C&E operators do all of their exfil through tunnels because they expect you to be blind to anything other than straight IPv4. Capture every attacker tool that you can and create detection wherever possible. Focus that detection more on how the tool works than more transient, easily changeable things like what IPs or domains it might use today. We don't leak out what we know. Don't let the adversary know what you know. Some actors, when they think they have been detected, will vanish. Share intel only with trusted and vetted partners. Next, the attacker. Encrypt wherever possible for tool transfer, C2, data exfil, everything. Us. Encryption makes my life a lot harder, but I need to understand my adversary might use it often and deal with it as best I can. Consider, where do I have extra visibility through things like SSL termination? What can I tell before any encryption happened on any compromised source machine, before that data ever got encrypted? Think RAM dump analysis. Can you see what commands were issued by the attacker in the RAM dump? Think file system timeline analysis. What files were touched before any encrypted network traffic happened? Can we build a way to decrypt by reverse engineering any captured tools? On the bright side, the fact that something is encrypted that normally isn't encrypted can help us find hostile activity in some cases. Next, we will cover a few points on how we, as incident handlers for APT matters, think about prevention and defense. First, put more kill in your kill chain. The cyber kill chain is a concept brought to us courtesy of Lockheed Martin. Basically, this kill chain model is a comprehensive 7-step framework to help you organize your approach to defending yourself against each stage of a typical attack. The kill chain is a useful framework to discuss attacks and organize your thoughts, but needs to be used to its full potential. We need to stop damage as early in the kill chain as practical. We believe that a heavy focus on prevention is the right direction for incident response going forward. That is the kill part of it, not forever working the same types of intrusions. Is it really necessary to continue to pour more money and resources every year into security, forever banished to a world where defenses fail? Or can we do better and reduce the number of successful attacks and damage over time? In general, you will go a long way by keeping everything that is remotely exploitable patched across your Windows client population and across your internet-facing assets. But there are a few things that merit calling out. Java, as we have discussed, is one of our current major pain points. So just patch, right? Don't deploy Java runtimes on your Windows clients at all? Yes, exactly. So, what if you have to have Java in production, but you can't patch Java due to applications requiring certain Java versions to function properly? Are you done? No. Question: if you have unpatchable Java instances in production, have you taken this list of 17 Java CVEs to your network IPS people to make sure that you have block and notify coverage for each? Likewise, have you contacted your AV and HIPS vendor to confirm coverage for all 17? AV isn't dead. It helps in some cases. What about your web proxy vendors? What coverage do they have for these 17? If you don't find any of these first 3 proposals effective, then Microsoft's EMET 5 might be helpful here. Just so everyone is on the same page, EMET stands for Microsoft's Enhanced Mitigation Experience Toolkit and is a set of mitigations that you can add to Windows to help protect against a range of exploitation techniques. EMET is effective for prevention for many things if, 1, you can deploy it without breaking production. Your experience may vary, but EMET sometimes needs tuning in some environments for a successful rollout. And pilot and roll out EMET slowly. When EMET breaks, it can be impactful to the affected machines, including blue screening, so please be careful. 2, you need to keep EMET patched and up to date. You cannot just deploy a particular version of EMET once and never touch it again. Example, if you rolled out EMET 3.0, that was great, but unfortunately, in 2013, there were at least 2 IE0 days that only EMET 4.1 would stop. EMET 3.0 wasn't effective against those. That trend has continued into 2014. You must run at least EMET 4.1 or 5. Please take a look at this chart. This is from Microsoft's latest Security Intelligence Report from May 2014. This chart shows what Microsoft says were vulnerabilities used in targeted attacks that were mitigated by EMET. Note what is not in this chart, any mention of a Java CVE. Here is a chart we showed you before from Microsoft's Security Intelligence Report that we have overlaid with what EMET covers and what it currently doesn't. This shows visually roughly how much benefit you get from EMET. Looking at the bar on the far right-hand side of the chart, the red and green boxes at the top are IE and Adobe Flash, and the larger blue box is Java. So this chart shows that EMET 4.1 or 5 helps, but isn't a cure for everything right now, largely due to Java not being covered by the core technical mitigations within EMET. However, EMET 5 is out now. It was released at the end of July 2014. EMET 5 has a new feature that might be appealing to organizations struggling with client-side Java compromises. EMET 5 allows you, through a feature named Attack Surface Reduction, to allow or disallow Java by Internet Explorer Security Zone. By default, EMET 5 allows Java applications to run in the Trusted Sites and Intranet zones and blocks Java in the Internet zone. This might be something worth considering and testing. Recall earlier when we mentioned some organizations see anywhere between 80 to 90% of their compromises involving Java in some way? Also, targeted watering hole attacks frequently have a Java exploit associated with them. EMET 5 could provide relief for both types of problems. Next, how should you think about handling all those malicious Office documents that we said earlier were a problem with targeted spear phishing? Why is this such a big deal? We think, by and large, everyone deploys Microsoft's monthly patches and keeps their operating system versions patchable, meaning running a supported major version and service pack level. What we don't believe is widely known is that Microsoft Office installations go off patching support fairly quickly after new service packs are released, normally 12 months. For example, if you're running Office 2010 broadly across your organization, your installations with no service pack aren't receiving any patches. Your installations with Office 2010 Service Pack 1 go off support in October 2014, next month. It is important to keep Office both patchable, under support, and patched. In many cases, the only thing that stopped an intrusion for us is the fact that our Office installations are fully patched, not AV, not any other defensive layer. Patching works. It isn't just busy work. Next, regarding the issue we mentioned earlier in the talk about third-party connections, what do you do about it? By and large, the same security measures that will work for you will work for them. So you might want to hold these partners to appropriate minimum security standards before they are allowed to connect to your network, and require that they maintain those minimum standards for the entire time period that your relationship requires any type of connectivity between your two networks. Also, develop relationships with the security staff of these organizations. An active incident is not the time to be asking for contact names and phone numbers. Be prepared. Know what a breach coming over that partner connection would look like, what firewalls and IP addresses are involved. Monitor those connections. Maybe consider funneling those third parties through a very small number of network choke points. Doing that will make it easier to monitor them. Reduce the attack surface exposed from your own network, meaning limit the services and systems reachable through those partner connections. Don't expose your whole flat network to them if possible. Network segmentation and air gapping works for both dealing with what is reachable from partner connections and within your own environment as well. Aside from looking for APT-specific indicators, we cannot think of anything that we are doing from a defense or prevention perspective that is uniquely applicable to only APT actors. In our experience, the exact same security practices and defenses are effective on both the APT side and non-APT side. Good security is good security.
So finally, we wanted to touch on a few brief points about your team and your people. Sorry. Some people 101 is you don't want to suppress or discourage ideas from new or junior people. You want to continuously improve the skill level of your team. So if a frontline SOC person misses an alert, which is better, just to never tell them about it or to go over and discuss with them what they did wrong. You want to hold yourself to an unwavering high standard and continuously improve from there. You want to be engaged and learn absolutely everything you can about your job every single day. You want to manage your people to a high standard and set them up for success. And a key point to keep in mind here is that you can't depend on technology alone. Technology is only going to take you so far. You need your people to be well-trained and supported, and they can't be overwhelmed. Your frontline staff needs to be listened to and respected, and your escalation paths need to work. Because you never know when a Target or Home Depot-like incident might happen with serious ramifications to both your company's bottom line and their reputation. You want to talk to your colleagues a lot. Don't live in a bubble. Some of us are introverts, but we need to take advantage of the experience and ideas of those around us. You want to talk to your leadership regularly. If you have concerns, are you being resourced correctly? Do you have enough people, money, and tools? You want to talk to your vendors. If there's something not working as it should or needs a new feature, you want to talk to your vendors. Consider talking to your red team and internal pen testers. From time to time, you might want to ask them, what's the worst thing we're missing or not doing? And sometimes the answer might surprise you. You also want to talk to your customers, which are the people that you're providing incident response services to. You want to find out how you're doing through their eyes. And we do that by surveys. Do your customers think you're as good as incident response as you do? And as corny as it sounds, we found a simple survey like this to be invaluable. There's always a kernel of truth in even the worst feedback. And we tend to prefer anonymous surveys because we want the feedback to be as honest as possible. The question on our survey is on the screen. We go on to briefly describe exactly what services we provide, and then we ask for a rating of 1 to 10 on how we're meeting their expectations and our stated goals. And we measure this every quarter with the goal of raising our overall score every time. So at the end of the day, the thing that makes our whole process work is really the great, passionate people. And we believe that IT security isn't doomed to failure, to losing ground to adversaries and suffering endless loss and damage like we've seen in the news recently. It might not ever be possible to completely win, but we can certainly raise that bar for the attackers a lot higher. One lesson that you'll learn over time if you work in incident response is that everything everybody does matters, whether that's security policy, vulnerability management and patching, account management, locking down your endpoints, secure development practices, incident response, or the building and maintenance of all your defensive layers. All of that plays into this. So speaking of good people, GE is hiring. David and I work out of a relatively new office in Richmond, Virginia, and our larger team, GE IT Risk, also has staff in offices in other areas, including Cincinnati, Ohio, and Van Buren Township in Michigan. So if you're interested in possibly working for us, you can go to ge.com/infosec to see what positions might be open. We have about 15 positions open right now. And our GE site is also on Twitter at GEInfosec. Sorry, it's our obligatory HR slide. So we'd like to thank you for our time. If anybody has any questions, I think we have a minute or so.
Yes, sir. Do we have the question is, do we have a process for attribution? Forget about the there's some GE people who are laughing. It's a very tough problem. I assume you know some of the internals of how difficult that is. We're a publicly traded company. We're not law enforcement. We're not intelligence services. We're not military going to drop ordnance on somebody. So we tend to pursue attribution as more of like a convenience for us internally to bucketize attacks and what have you, and also helps you organize your thoughts when you're actually working in intrusion. But do we have a process for that? We do the best we can, but it is a dog difficult problem. But we do the best we can with it. But we don't have some kind of process we can share or publish or anything like that. That's the best answer I have. Sorry. Was there something else over here? Yes, sir. I'm sorry. The question was, does GE pretty much use all internal, like blue badge talent, or some outsource? It's a mix. GE was an early pioneer in outsourcing. We had the old one, if you read about those Jack Welch 70-70-70 plan. And we outsourced a lot back then, but over time, newer senior leadership has kind of changed that a little bit, and they pulled some of the work back in over time. We have thousands and thousands of contractors, lots and lots of blue badge. We just operate a mix. That's what the purpose of this whole IT risk shop that Katherine was talking about before. We're like the central piece of that. But GE being a big conglomerate, we're not just light bulbs. We're everything in lots of industries. We have counterparts and colleagues in every part of GE that make sure we have the right policies and procedures in place to go and police that as best we can. It's a difficult problem. Oftentimes we don't have eyes on those shops, but we have many legal, contractual, compliance reasons why we got to do that. Plus, just a product craftsmanship thing to make sure that there's no problems developing there. Does that answer the question? Yeah, but it's the best I got. That's a tough one. You know it is. Yes, sir. We do the best we can with that. We got a couple Intel people up in the front here help us out with that a lot. But basically, it's based off the intel that we have, and back to the attribution question before. We do the best we can with that, but I got to tell you, it's not the 90s anymore. It's not the 80s or 90s. It's a lot more difficult to tell targeted versus not, because it's not just the nation states that you read in the news doing it anymore. It's more people, and sometimes it's just individuals, and I think it's gotten a little gray. It's a little fuzzy in between. So again, it's one of those best effort, we do the best we can kind of things, but we do err on the side of caution. I'm not sure where you're going with the question, but we don't just say it's not ABT and just be cavalier and lean back on it. We will do whatever is required to go and defend GE. So if something's in a gray area, we will engage and we will take care of it. I don't know who was next. I'll just start here. Yes, sir?
Do you find that your segmentation by phase of the IR lifecycle is a benefit to building expertise in those particular areas, or do you find it more of a hindrance because of the need to hand off and share and report back pausing versus true concepts?
Right. The question is basically, do you find it more productive to be split up the way we have those little groups of intel, detect, and response or whatever, versus, I guess, a more monolithic team? Preface this by saying this is my personal opinion, not her, not anybody else. I find it better to hire smart people and have them wear many hats so they can be more engaged and learn, again, everything they can about the job. Remember what you said in one of the last few slides? But GE is a big honking company, and it's not possible in some cases to operate without having specialization there. We just need a lot of people. So we've chosen broken down this way over time. If we find that's not the most ideal way to handle things, we'll reorganize again. But I understand it's broken down into passing ticket to ticket from one place to another. It has a lot of opportunities for failures, but you've got to be really tight in how you construct your processes and be very careful about the people that you hire. Make sure they're smart, careful type folks, and you can be successful either way. Yes, sir.
Has all of the work you've done on targeted tests, has that measurably cut down on the non-targeted, what I call commodity software? The normal day-to-day consistency, the normal day-to-day malware.
Right.
Do you see that as kind of leveled off and decreasing as you kind of going up the levels, or do you still see a fair amount of the commodity stuff still getting through?
Yeah, I got you. I don't know if you recall earlier in the presentation, I said something about the same prevention and defensive techniques will work on both the APT and the non-APT side. Now, what's happening on the outside here, let's backtrack. We're going to do whatever it takes to make sure we defend GE. That's our job. That's what we get paid to do, right? But your question is, when you make these adjustments on the APT side to guard yourself against the multi-billion-dollar losses, does it also help with like the Zeuses and the other more garden variety or cybercrime malware out there? And I see the answer is absolutely yes, because I don't know if you remember from this slide. How are we doing on time? Oh. Remember this guy here? See that blue box at the bottom on the far right, that Java piece? That's the thing you got to solve. The Adobe Flash you can patch, IE you can patch. The Java thing is where I see, organizations that we serve, if they're having difficulty with general malware, that's the place. Does that make sense? But we have the same problem on the APT side. We will absolutely pursue that and hunt that problem down to extinction. But once we do that, we absolutely will see a drop off in the damage we see on the cybercrime side. Exactly. That's exactly. What the gentleman's point was, the reason why EMET's not effective against Java isn't some, like a political thing between Microsoft and Oracle or Sun, right? It's a technical issue. Java is a JVM, and EMET doesn't instrument what happens inside the JVM. If EMET was ever going to be effective against a Java exploit, like a Java CVE, it would have to be something that EMET could see. But again, that EMET 5, I do recommend pursuing that because that looks like it'll be handy. Yes, sir. Exactly, exactly. That's a great point. The gentleman says you don't necessarily have to roll an EMET to do that. There's lots of other ways to handle it for free and with paid products. But for this presentation, the EMET 5 just came out, and it's something you can do for free, and it's like on by default. So I figure it's like simple enough for everybody to do without having to solve a very difficult problem. I think we'll just take one more. Yes, sir. Oh, yes, sir.
This summer was released that there's a vulnerability which will actually target 4.1, where actually will cause a little obstacle rather than stop the attack. It'll actually go to just automating it, so it'll actually let it through and it'll log it. So more to the point of getting MF5 going to 4.1.
Yeah, exactly. The gentleman's just underscoring the point about some issue that he observed with EMET 4, some issue where an attacker could go and turn EMET 4 from blocking down to just like logging, and it just underscores the point you have to keep everything you deploy on your machines patchable and patched, and perhaps consider moving to EMET 5. Thank you guys for your attention. I think I've gone over time. Thank you so much. Thank you.